Hi, I'm Kelley Lavin, and I'm Kelley Lavin, and I'm the publisher of Sarasota Magazine, and welcome you to this fascinating discussion this afternoon with Dr. Garland Glenn about restoring your brain health, reversing the symptoms of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. Dr. Garland Glenn, DC, is the founder and director of the Carroll Institute. He is an international speaker with a global patient base. He is certified both in reversing cognitive decline and functional neurology. Dr. Glenn is a graduate of Baylor University and the National University of Health Sciences. He received his neurology training at the Carroll Institute in Amsterdam. He is a member on the International Board of Functional Neurology, and he's a longtime resident here in Sarasota. So Dr. Glenn, let's get started. What causes cognitive decline, including Alzheimer's?
That's a good question. And before I do that, I want to thank you, Kelley, and the magazine for putting this together. This is great. Over the last 25 years, and this has been spearheaded by a Dr. Dale Bredesen, who runs the Buck Institute of Aging at UCLA. They have discovered 36 different things or conditions that do what we call drive cognitive decline. That's the word that we use. It drives the process. And we call these are the root causes. That's what we call them, or sometimes we affectionately refer to them as the roof with 36 holes. And these include a lot of different things, all the way from diabetes, toxic exposures like pesticides and molds and things like that, to even trauma. And we actually put them into 6 different categories. And we'll show you those categories right here. Tom will put that up. Thank you, Tom. We break these 36 different things into these groups. The first group is inflammation. And inflammation, that sounds a little vague at first, but inflammation is what happens anytime tissue gets damaged. And it doesn't matter if it's when you sprain your ankle or you get bitten by a mosquito, that is an inflammatory process. The second thing is blood sugar regulation. And the biggest example of that is diabetes. I mean, diabetes is a big problem now. The next thing are hormonal and nutritional deficiencies, and these are especially prevalent as we age. The next group of things is what we call toxins. And toxins can be all types of heavy metals, like lead, aluminum, stuff like that, all the way to pesticides and mold. The next category is vascular. And this, we often think of this in terms of stroke. Stroke is when you lose oxygen to your brain, but you can also have very slow oxygen deficit over the years. And then the last group is what we call trauma. And trauma could be everything from hitting your head on the windshield in a car accident to repetitive injury playing football when you were in high school. All of these things combine together to drive what we call cognitive decline or the various forms of dementia.
So which ones of these do you see the most in your office, in your practice?
What we see most is a combination of inflammation and blood sugar regulation. There's lots, and all of these things, they overlap to a certain degree. But the main thing that causes inflammation is the high carbohydrate diets that we've eaten for the last 60 years or so. And of course, high carbohydrate diets is what has driven the epidemic of diabetes. Now close to 40% of Americans are diabetic. So those are the two things that we see the most.
Well, boy, I think all of us, as we think back on our diet and what actually was promoted to us to eat, yes, in this age group as a younger child. So, gosh. So what are some of the first signs of cognitive decline? And at what age do they begin to appear?
All right. These are things that a lot of times we've sort of been told as we've grown up that these are just, not important, don't worry about them. But the first thing that we typically see is something called mental fog, or some people call it brain fog. When I was in school in the middle 80s, we didn't even have a word, brain fog. But brain fog is actually one of the very earliest signs that something's going on that shouldn't be. The next thing is mental fatigue. Mental fatigue is when you can't do something for as long as you used to, like read or drive or something like that. You just can't do it for as long. Decreased sharpness and recall speed. You're just not quite as sharp as you were. Nobody keeps a checkbook anymore, but that'd be a great example of being sharp. Forgetting words, faces, names, those are all a little bit different. But this thing about forgetting words, we joke and we call it a senior moment. But a senior moment means something isn't working. And we've sort of been told over the years that, this is normal. Well, back to the concept of diabetes. Something might be common, but that doesn't make it normal. Nobody would call diabetes normal, even though it's very common. Well, forgetting words is common, but that doesn't make it normal. It's a sign that you're not accessing stored information back in your brain like you ought to. Difficulty recalling recent events. That's an issue. Depression. Depression is a really strong indicator of neurodegeneration. And as a matter of fact, one of the largest groups of pharmaceuticals used in the United States are antidepressives. What you really have to do is you have to find out what is driving that problem. So that's a big issue. Vision issues, and this is more your inability to differentiate contrast and shades. The next two, I always put them together: loss of smell and constipation. Now, those are actually the earliest two signs of Parkinson's disease. Constipation is another thing that is very, very common. As a matter of fact, I see it in more people than I don't. When you're not going every day, your brain and your gut are not talking to each other like they should. That's something that should not be dismissed. So constipation is another really, really big thing. Any of these things that you see in this list here, if these are going on, you need to identify what is causing it and see if you can fix that.
So I'm looking at this list and I'm going, oh my gosh. There are some of these that I am recognizing now, and boy, and I have to say that is so great why I've met you, because I'm realizing there is something we can do about it. But what happens if someone doesn't pay attention and you just, once this decline starts and they just ignore it, what happens?
Well, whatever causes these things to happen, they don't just happen. All right. We all know examples of the 94-year-old college professor that's still as sharp as the freshman students. These things develop very, very slowly over time. And whatever's causing them, if you don't address them, it will continue to escalate and get worse and worse. So what happens is, and I think I have this laid out. If you want to bring that up, Tom, the way we look at this is everybody hopefully starts off at some version of normal. There you go, nice and healthy, and your brain's working great, and so on and so forth. And then very slowly we get into something that is called subjective cognitive impairment. Now, subjective cognitive impairment is when you reach for a word and it's not there. And so what happens is you will use a different word, or you open the refrigerator and you can't remember what you were looking for. All right. This is when you can recognize you're starting to slip a little bit, but people who know you well, spouse, your kids, your best friend, whatever, people who know you very well, they don't see anything yet. So you're recognizing it, but they're not. The dangerous thing here is the more educated you are, the farther you can slip into this subjective cognitive impairment before it starts to become noticeable. All right. Subjective cognitive impairment can sometimes last anywhere from as long as 10 to 20 years before you move into this middle stage called mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment is when people who know you well, your spouse, let's say, they start to see you're slipping. But somebody you might meet casually at a party or a gathering of some kind, or at the store or whatever, they wouldn't know. They think that's just your personality. Mild cognitive impairment, you're progressing pretty quickly down the slope towards the early stages of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. By the time somebody who doesn't know you can tell that you're slipping, you're already into the early stages of Alzheimer's. So if you meet somebody and you can tell they're not mentally sharp like they should be or whatever, by the time they get there, they're in a lot of trouble already at that point. And this whole progression from normal, healthy, whatever you want to call that, down into this early stages of Alzheimer's, this can go on for 20 years or more. And the goal what we're trying to do is we're trying to show people how to catch this way early before it can progress down into these later stages. By the time you get into later stage Alzheimer's, there's very, very little that can be done. So you really want to catch this stuff early.
And that leads me to a question that we received over and over prior to the seminar today. And it's about the risk due to family members having Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. What does it mean if I have a history of cognitive decline in my own family, like a parent or a grandparent?
Okay. This is where a lot of people, as a matter of fact, a lot of people are coming to us now because they say, I've been taking care of my mom, or I'm watching this happen to my parents, or I watched it happen. And one, they want to be sort of proactive, but also there's a little bit of fear that can be involved because you're kind of, is this going to happen to me? There's a lot of genetics involved, but the main one that we call the Alzheimer's gene, it's actually called the APOE4 gene, but we each have 2 copies of this gene. You get one from mom and one from dad. All right. The probability or the risk factor, the way it works is if you don't have any genetic predisposition at all, then you run about a 10% risk of developing Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia. If you have 1 copy of the gene, then your risk goes up to about 35%. So this is a significant increase. If you have 2 copies of the gene, your risk is well over 50%. So you've got more of a risk of developing it than you do of not developing it. Now, I always like to make this statement, and that is your genetics are not your destiny. All right. They're your roadmap. Let's call them a roadmap for what you ought to be doing. So let me describe the genetics like this. You get out on the Tamiami Trail. All right. And you're going 85 miles an hour. Your probability or your risk of having an accident would go up significantly. It doesn't mean you will have an accident, but your risk of having an accident goes up a lot. If you get out there and drive 45, other than getting people ticked off at you, that doesn't mean that you won't have an accident, but your risk would go way down. All right. So we look at the genetics and we say, what is your risk? And I try to use that. This is not something that should strike fear. It's something that should motivate people. If you have Alzheimer's in the family, the motivation for being proactive as early on as you possibly can should go way up. That's the way I look. That's the way we look at the DNA and the risk factors.
Now, not every cognitive disease or condition has a gene. So, for example, some Parkinson's are not genetic.
That's true.
So not everybody should strike fear. You just need to be educated. You need to understand.
Good point. Yes. As a matter of fact, dementia is sort of the umbrella under which all forms of cognitive decline exist. So you mentioned Parkinson's. Parkinson's is a form of neurodegeneration or cognitive decline. It has very specific symptoms that you see. But by the way, by the time somebody develops the tremor that you see in Parkinson's, the degeneration of that part of the brain, it's called the basal ganglia, but the degeneration of that part of the brain has been going on for at least 20 years. And so, but we now have ways to pick this up a lot earlier, and I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
Well, let's find out. So if I'm beginning to experience brain fog, which I think a lot of us are going, oh, that's just the COVID problem right now. But walk me through the process. When I come to you, what happens, what first happens, and then go through the steps.
All right. So when somebody comes in to see us, well, first of all, people come to see us because they want to be proactive and do something, or something's going on and they're looking for help. So the very first thing we start off with is a very detailed questionnaire. And as a matter of fact, we probably ask more questions than most people have ever been asked before. The more that we know about you, the better we can find out what is uniquely going on with you. The next thing that we do in the office is we do a computerized test. We have several places here in the office set up to do this test, and they've run well over 10 million tests like this, so we have a great database to draw from. But we do a computerized test. It's called a CNS, or central nervous system vital signs. So we all know about our vital signs. You go to the doctor and he checks your blood pressure and your temperature and your pulse rate. Those are your vital signs. So what we do is we have a test that can tell us what your central nervous system or your brain's vital signs are, and we can tell how well your brain is working. So I use this example. It's like if you go to check out a car, you need to drive. You want to drive the car. You want to see if it runs properly, if the transmission shifts, if the air conditioning works. You want to see how all the different systems function. And we're able to do that with this test. It takes about 30 minutes. And it's non-invasive. We don't poke you with anything or stick you with needles or anything like that. Once we get that data, then we sit down and we have a very thorough consultation. We sit and talk. Unfortunately, most doctors don't talk to their patients anymore. But what we do is we sit down and talk about what is happening with you. How long have you noticed this? Did anything trigger it, like trauma, or let's say general anesthesia or something like that, or a big stress event? Stress can trigger this stuff. That's a big thing. So we do a very thorough consultation, get an idea of what is driving this process. And if we see things that are going on, then what we can do is we can run this very new type of MRI called a volumetric MRI. This is very, very new stuff. With a volumetric MRI, we can actually see what parts of the brain are shrinking years before they're symptomatic. And when we can see what parts of the brain are shrinking, we know from experience and from the science of doing this, the different kinds of things that affect different parts of the brain. So then we know where to go looking for those root causes that we talked about before. When we find the root causes, we have access to some brand new, and I mean brand new, like as in just this year, brand new DNA testing, where we're able to find out what genetic factors are going on that could be causing you to be vulnerable to whatever is driving that root cause. So when somebody comes to see us, we do a very thorough questionnaire. We do a computerized test right here in the office, takes about 30 minutes. We do a consult. If it's warranted, then what we do is we go farther and we look at MRIs and things like that, look at labs. That's what we do.
So it all starts with a good, thorough conversation.
Yes.
And that leads me to my next question. What is the difference between what you do and, say, a neurologist?
All right. Neurologists are trained to treat symptoms with pharmaceuticals. And one of my best friends from Baylor, we actually officed together for a while. He's a medical neurologist. He is exceptionally good at what he does. All right. The fastest growing segment in medicine right now is a brand new sort of specialty, if you will, called functional medicine. And functional medicine focuses on identifying the root causes for whatever it is that's going on. Now, in our case, we're looking at cognitive issues, but let's say you had digestive problems, or you had thyroid problems, or something like that. If you can find out what's causing the problem, then you can go fix the cause. And fixing the cause in the long run is far better than trying to manage the symptoms. All right. The use of pharmaceuticals and drugs is great for managing symptoms in certain cases, but it doesn't normally get to the root cause and correct that. What we're wanting to do here in functional neurology is we want to find out which one of those root causes or groups of them are giving you your issue. And one of the things that we know is that by the time a person gets to that mild cognitive impairment that we talked about, we go from subjective to mild into early stage dementia. By the time a person gets to that mild cognitive impairment, they've got at least 10 or more of those root causes going on. And that's the key, is finding the root cause rather than trying to manage the symptoms. So that's the difference between functional neurology and traditional neurology.
So essentially you can, and let's just say if you have a bad diet or you're in a very stressful situation that is more of a chronic. I mean, when you mention stress, it seems like you're talking about not the momentary stress that you're angry at somebody who made a crazy left turn in front of you or something, but you're talking about more long-term stressful situations. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up. This has just recently been published, and I found out about it from a colleague of mine, Dr. Karazian, and that is when you get upset with somebody, whether it's your spouse or that jerk that just cut you off, right? And we all have that happen sometimes. There is an inflammatory response called interleukin-6 that goes on in your brain. If you get upset with somebody, those inflammatory markers can go up for as long as 3 days.
Wow.
Yes. And so if you take a major stressor, such as moving house, losing a loved one, getting married. I always tell people, building a house is stressful. Having your house burned down is stressful. Stress doesn't know if it's good or bad. It just is. And stress, the whole thing with our lockdown and everything has caused a lot of stress. And I've actually seen that as a trigger for a number of people. So emotional stress is a big trigger for we sort of treated this my dad was a Marine Corps drill instructor. All right. And stress was one of those things in my family that was considered to be a character flaw. My dad, he's one of the, you got to be stressed. I'll give you something to be stressed about. And so, but stress is actually a big, big thing. By the way, I wanted to mention something. I lost 3 grandparents and my father-in-law to this. And I've got an uncle who played pro ball for the Colts when they were in Baltimore. He was a center. And you know what centers do on the football field? They snap ball, hit head. He's in his 70s. It's not good. So this is very real thing in my family. So that's, yeah. But no, stress is a big, big trigger for these things.
So tell us about the programs that you offer for people who want to be proactive and prevent cognitive decline.
Okay. We have people come to us all the way from they're wanting to be proactive. They see something happening in their family or whatever. They're not experiencing any symptoms yet. All the way to people who are in early to mid-stage Alzheimer's. So we have the whole spectrum of people that come to us. What we do depends on where you are and what is going on. But we have everything from, we run some basic labs, get some markers about where you are, look at your DNA, make lifestyle recommendations for you. Lifestyle, we sort of think of lifestyle as, oh, that's not a big deal. Well, what you eat is a big deal. How well do you sleep? Several people ask questions about sleep, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Sleep is very important. Do you exercise properly? And exercise properly doesn't mean you spend like 3 hours a day on the treadmill. There's a very specific way to exercise that's good for your brain. So some people just want some lifestyle instruction. They want to know based on their DNA which supplements maybe they should be taking, all the way to people who are already into cognitive decline and Alzheimer's and dementia. Those people, we need to go in and find those root causes. And we have very specialized lab testing. As a matter of fact, we have our own panels with LabCorp that we have designed over the years of research and stuff. We have our own LabCorp panels that are specifically designed to find the root causes that do this. So we have different programs, but at the end of the day, every program is tailored exactly to the person who's needing the help and what they need. And we back that up with labs and things. So there's no cookie cutter program. Anytime somebody tries to give you a cookie cutter program, you need to run as fast as you can. And because this is a very, very individual situation.
So do people come with their partners, their spouses, their partners, perhaps even a caregiver?
Yeah, it's especially important the farther into the progression people are. I always tell people, I can find out more from your spouse than I can from you. I will ask a guy, how do you sleep? I sleep fine. She'll go, no, you don't. You're up all night. You can't sleep. You're going, you're waking everybody up. I find out more from the spouse or the caregiver than I often do from the patient. But because of the nature of this problem, we always like to have people come with somebody who knows them well, whether it's a spouse or a caregiver, or, a lot of times we have a lot of retired people who've come to Florida and their kids will come down and they'll bring mom in. And then actually every time we have a visit, we get the kids are our age, but we get them on the phone. I'm still a kid.
I hate when that happens. Their kids are our age.
Yeah, but we get them on the phone. In other words, your support group is very important in this. Very important, really is.
Do you have some stories? I mean, you just shared one, but do you have some stories about any of your cases that you can share?
I have one. I have a number of them, but I have one that is really special to me. This woman, she's in her 90s, and we have a little clip, but don't show it yet because I want to introduce it first. This woman is in her 90s. When she came to us, she was basically wheelchair bound. She was early stage Alzheimer's, diagnosed. Okay, she had already gotten a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. She has 2 sons that live in Colorado, a daughter that lives in Chicago. She had gotten to the point where she couldn't even hold a conversation with them on the phone. All right, so her support person brought her in. We figured out what was going on. We started addressing those root causes and getting them fixed. And actually, we have a little clip here of her dancing. Growing up, she loved to dance. And so I think, have we got that? She's talking to her kids on the phone every night. She is absolutely all here. And
I would give anything to have that moment with my mom back.
Wouldn't that be great?
And yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah.
But that is what we see. We see those kinds of results every day. We had a situation last week where somebody was in and the daughter said, for the first time, and I can't remember when, Mom realized that I was her daughter.
Oh.
I mean, this is real life. This is what family is about. And this is the whole thing about cognitive decline, is that it doesn't just affect the person. It affects the whole family. That's the big tragedy in this. So.
Well, and it speaks to why get help. Mm-hmm. Because it affects the whole family. And I know there are a lot of people out there, and a lot of people that I work with, and obviously in the age group, that right. You've had a parent decline, and mm-hmm. It's heartbreaking, but now realizing that it also has an impact on your own mental and cognitive conditions. So wow.
Yeah, it really does.
We received a lot of questions about the importance of sleep. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. This is one of those things that a lot of times, especially growing up, we almost look at, I can get by on only 4 hours of sleep as some sort of a badge or a virtue. Yeah. Sleep is so important. Well, first of all, several things happen during sleep. One of the things that happens during the sleep is you actually convert short-term memory. Short-term memory, what we call working memory, happens in the front of your brain. So working memory is when you look at something and then write the phone number down. Okay? When you sleep, you convert working memory into longer-term memory. Goes back into your brain into a different part. If you're not getting good sleep, you're not creating memories. So that's a factor. The other thing that happens during sleep is like when the cleaning crew comes in and cleans up your house and carries out the trash. And your body every day, the process of metabolism is always producing byproducts of waste and things that need to be gathered up and gotten rid of. And you do that when you sleep. Now there's two things that you need to look at when it comes to sleep. One is, how well do you fall asleep? You should be able to lie down at whatever reasonable time is for you, all right? And you should be able to fall asleep in 10, 15, no more than 20 minutes. If you're not falling asleep easily, something is going on with your cortisol and melatonin. The other thing is you should be able to sleep through the night. Now, as we get older, we often need to go more often, all right? Now, if you need to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom and you get right back in bed and you fall right back to sleep, that qualifies as sleeping through the night. But if you get up and go to the bathroom, you get back in bed and you lay there for an hour, hour and a half before you can fall back to sleep, that's something called reactive hypoglycemia, which is actually sort of the reverse of diabetes and is just as damaging on the brain as diabetes is. All right. So you should be able to fall asleep easily. You should be able to sleep through the night, and you should feel rested and rejuvenated when you wake up. Otherwise, we need to find out why you aren't. And if we find out why you aren't, then we'll fix it. So that's sleep is really important. And along with diet and exercise, those are the three most important lifestyle things you can do.
We received probably the question we received the most of revolves around diet and supplements. But what do you recommend for brain health?
This is one of those questions that well, first of all, I'm going to say, maybe we should do another Facebook Live thing about just diet for the brain, because you can talk about this for days. But on the one hand, it has to be very personalized to each person, which supplements would work for you and which ones don't you need and so forth. But in general terms, if I was going to tell something, the most important thing that you can do starting right now today to save your brain, number one, you need to cut the carbohydrates down. We've been eating way too many carbohydrates since the 1960s. Carbohydrates, that's a fancy word for sugar. Sugar is inflammatory. So you want to cut your carbohydrates down, and you want to replace those carbs with good quality fats, not the bad fats, good quality fats and good quality protein. All right. The other thing, and this is becoming more and more prevalent as the years go by, is the avoidance of gluten. Now, I know I may have just stepped on a few toes, but I can tell you, I developed a gluten problem 8 years ago. And I, nor most of my colleagues, really even knew what it was. But gluten, especially gluten was hybridized. Wheat was hybridized in the late 60s by a fellow named Norman Borland at the Texas A&M University. When they changed it, it changed the protein structure. New gluten, it's not the amber waves of grain that we sang about as kids. Wheat fields now are about 18 inches to 2 feet tall. They're not 5, 6 feet tall like they used to be. The new gluten damages the intestinal lining and creates an inflammatory response. Now, in the last few years, we have come to find out that when you damage that intestinal lining, you get this thing called a leaky gut. The problem with leaky gut is the chemicals that cause that. The main one is something called zonulin. Zonulin will actually go up and damage your blood-brain barrier, and it will allow things into the brain that aren't supposed to be there. And so what we're finding is that gluten avoidance is one of the most important things you can do to save your brain. So what you would do is cut the carbohydrates down and eliminate the gluten from your diet. Two most important things that you could do with that. Beyond that, it really becomes more of what is right for you. There's no supplement that is right for everyone. Example, I had a fellow in last week. This guy, he plays probably 2 hours of tennis every day. One of the greatest tans I've ever seen. His vitamin D level was low, and I'm thinking, how can your vitamin D be low? You're outside every day. We ran his DNA. He has a SNP of a gene. A SNP is called, it's a little bit of a gene that prevents his body from being able to turn sunshine into vitamin D. That's why you have to treat every person as the individual that they are.
And in the short time we have left, one of the questions is, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
That's a really good question, because a lot of people don't know. Dementia, I call it, dementia is sort of an umbrella under which all forms of cognitive decline exist. That could be Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is characterized by the amyloid plaquing. But there are other types. There's frontotemporal dementia. That's when people's personality changes. They actually become different people. There's Lewy body dementia, and that's the type when people have vivid, powerful hallucinations, right? There's vascular dementia. That's when you're having little minor strokes. You're getting blood and oxygen loss to the brain. Parkinson's is a form of dementia. So you have all of these different things are forms of dementia. So Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. That's the way that goes.
Well, this has been so enlightening, and I know we have just scratched the surface.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm walking away with is that genetics are not my destiny. So,
that's right.
And I can act on this, but as you've got me kind of thinking, as I wander around or look into the refrigerator and actually can't remember what I went there for, mm-hmm. I probably need to, not probably, I need to come see you.
You do.
Yeah.
I didn't mean it that way. I mean, no. I would love for you to come see me.
No, but it is that idea of discovery. And that is the first step, is when you after you decide and look at Dr. Carroll's website, which we'll put on the screen, you'll set up what they call a discovery call. And right. I think this is just priceless in taking out that fear factor, because this can be so fearful, but yet you've given us hope that there are things that we can do now to improve the quality of our lives and the quality of people who we love and take care of us, or our friends. Mm-hmm. So again, go to the Carroll Institute, the carrollinstitute.com. It's on the screen, and set up a call, and you can get a Reclaim Your Brain 10-day video series free. And I have watched it, and I'll tell you, this was possibly the best 10 days I have spent, because it does show that there is hope.
There is hope.
Great.
There sure is.
Dr. Glenn, thank you very much.
Thank you.